9 out of 10 women in the study that I quoted in the book have mental health issues during menopause. And that could be anything from like mood changes to severe depression. I actually hit perimenopause at the same time as qualifying as this personal trainer, who then went on to social media just to help people keep moving during the pandemic. And I started getting all these, pretty wacky symptoms. When your menstrual cycle is all over the place, the hormones are out of whack. It can affect your self-esteem, your mood. It affects everyone around you. And I just put it down to stress. I just thought, I'm doing new things. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm on Instagram and Zoom and YouTube and, all these platforms. And it broke me to tears, Scott. I literally was crying. Whether it's your wife, whether it's your daughter, your mum, your colleague, your friends, you're all going to have women in your lives. And it's just like a conversation, just like puberty. Like, we just got to all understand that this is a phase that women will go through. I want men to be part of this conversation. I guess what I would love them to do is just...
Athletics and physical fitness and all of these things has been a big part of your life. Give our listeners a little bit of the why behind your story, and most importantly, how this impacts your day in and day out life.
Yeah, so lots to unpick, I guess, in those amazing accolades, if you want to call them, which are still a bit surreal because my journey was not planned. I was not meant to. I didn't see myself being a personal trainer at the age of 46. Being a South Asian woman and a mum of three is probably, the top of the list. When anyone asks me what I do, I just say I'm a mum to three boys, because I think that in itself is like the most rewarding part of my life. And they've grown up. They're all very sporty, I think a bit like yours. But actually, fitness for me was quite alien growing up. And I never actually got into it until my sort of early to mid 30s, which I guess you could call late. And I now, my messaging is always that it's never too late to start. I do workouts, I've had up to the age of 100 join some of my chair-based workouts that I do every Friday with my dear mother-in-law, which we started in the COVID pandemic, alongside my husband and youngest son, who started doing daily lives with me. But yeah, I only discovered exercise in my 30s, and that was after pregnancy. And I had put on a lot of weight. I probably was double my size. Not again that my messaging has changed so much. It's not about how we look. It's more about, I feel, the power of what movement does to make us feel good, not just physically, but mentally as well. And I always say, my slogan is to exercise for sanity, not vanity. But it was when I just joined the gym, and I was feeling pretty unhealthy. And it was basically, Scott, the rates of things like diabetes. So type 2 diabetes is very prevalent in the South Asian community. In the UK, I was pretty alarmed. These statistics that I researched just before the COVID pandemic we're 6 times more likely than the average white person here to have type 2 diabetes. And there's so many people living with pre-diabetes. And more than that, these types of chronic illnesses are very prevalent in my own family. And my grandfather passed away from diabetes, and it runs on my mum's side. So I was feeling pretty unhealthy. I'd put on a lot of weight, and I just joined the gym like a lot of mums do. I was probably just consoling one another, going to coffee mornings and jumping around like group exercise classes, not really getting any results as such in terms of weight loss. And it was only when I discovered strength training through hiring a personal trainer of my own. And it was totally a massive game changer for me. I'd never lifted anything. I'd lifted like my shopping bags, or, when I worked in the corporate world before all of this happened, suitcases on my travels. But in terms of lifting weights, I had never, ever done it. And it was just transformational. That made me want to research the science and sit the exams just out of my own knowledge, not even thinking that it's going to be a future career path. So it's quite probably not the answer you're expecting.
No, it's a great answer. I think what's really interesting is all through my children's lives, I used to say, look good, feel good, play good. And
Mm,
I've always felt like that as a mantra for what I believe. I had a friend of mine talking to me recently about weight gain and not feeling good in her skin,
mm,
and we were in the office, and I just said I look at our health a lot of times like a messy desk. Like if everything around us is clutter,
yeah,
if we're just doing everything so fast that we're not taking the time to look our best, to feel our best, to play our best, it becomes very difficult to be happy with what you see in the mirror.
yeah.
And this person says, "Well, I just don't look in the mirror." And I
Oh,
said, "Well, it starts with looking in the mirror, and not because you're vain, not because you want to see what changes are happening, positive or negative, but it is a level
yeah,
of self-awareness. It is a level of
yeah,
just acknowledging who you are and accepting it,
yeah.
acknowledging it, accepting it, and then taking action.
I
And
love
so
that.
I love your story. I totally resonate with that story, and it's something that you took action, and it's very unique when you start later because it's not fun in the beginning. It's
Mm.
new, but it's not fun.
Yeah, and it's like the different goals. I think, because I was older, I wasn't striving to do it to get a six pack or to go on social media. Like me being on social media was never ever the plan either. It's just that got so into it, and it's, I guess, through midlife and when you're getting older and you start having life experiences like the loss of a loved one. I lost my dear father-in-law, who I'd lived with as a joint, an Indian family. There were 9 of us together. He was probably more of a dad than my own dad was able to be, because they came to the UK in the 60s to start off, from scratch, and they didn't really have the time, right? They really heavily invested in my brother and my education, like a lot of South Asian families did when they came to the UK. But my father-in-law was an amazing man, and when I lost him through a brain tumor very suddenly, within 6 months, I think it is those moments where, not only is it a wake-up call that life is so precious, and life is short, it can happen to anyone, because he was fit and healthy, stress-free, no major signs or anything. He was the one going to the gym, before any of us in the family. He'd be at the door, when it opened at 6:30 a.m. But it was the gym, and it was lifting weights and having that out, sort of that space for myself, that gave me the chance to actually deal with grief. And it just gave me that break away from everything, where people talk about this flow state. And I never really understood what it was until, you're in that zone. And it doesn't have to be lifting weights. My message now is that, I've done so much research. I've written this, book, The Feel Good Fix. It has just come out, 2 weeks ago, actually today. And it was really the science. I want everything to be backed by science. So I did about 40 pages of research studies that are, the latest research. And it just shows how powerful movement can be, any form of movement, that makes you feel good. And that's, where I want it to be very accessible. It's not prescriptive, like you've got to do this, got to do that. Just knowing that, just a minute, I call it exercise snacking, is what, my whole like concept is based on. But it's so, amazing to know that every minute does count, and it's scientifically backed. And, I guess, any type of movement, whether it's a walk, a cycle, a swim, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's just a simple stretch or some mobility work, um, I always feel better. I don't know about you, but it's those magical endorphins. Like my whole feel good branding is, based on that, because it always makes me feel better.
Yeah, I just told someone the other day, we were talking, I was in the dentist office and I was finishing, and the hygienist was finishing up, and we were talking about podcasts and
Yeah.
the people I get to interview, and she was talking about having not a lot of time. And I said,
Mm,
do you find yourself staying up late at night to like watch another show or to do something because you haven't had time for yourself? And
yeah.
she goes, I absolutely do all the time. And I said, I used to do the same thing. And what I found was I needed to feel like I had time to myself. And it
Mm,
started with what you just mentioned. I would work out in the morning. I would move or walk in the morning. I have a sauna and the cold plunge. I do all that stuff. But
amazing.
the point that I'm getting at is I'm much I feel accomplished before I even
Mm,
start my day, air quotes here,
yeah.
and I've already accomplished enough for myself where I feel like I've done enough to invest in my body, to invest in my
Self-care.
mind. So
Yeah.
when you go to bed, if it's early and it's 9 o'clock and I'm just exhausted, I'll just go to bed instead of waiting up because I need to justify why I didn't do anything for myself today.
Do you know self-care? I've written a whole section on it in the book. And I think especially women in my community, where it's a lot about caring for others, a lot of South Asian women probably still, globally live in joint families. There's a lot, even just being a mom, being a female, generally, there's quite a lot of expectation. And I think, growing up, because exercise wasn't normal for me, I had no role models. There was no like PT out there that looked like Lavina, little Lavina, for me to even think. And I didn't really understand how amazing this would be at reducing my risks of, not just diabetes, but heart disease, to cancers, to Alzheimer's, which my grandmother had. And again, that was a taboo subject, a big health area that we never talked about, dementia, because it was just kind of buried and it was a bit shameful. So, I mean, I wish, like, obviously my younger self had known this earlier, but that's why I'm very vocal and so passionate about hoping to just spread this knowledge. I want everyone to know about this, and I want them to know that there's so many free tools. You talk about, I've done a section on self-care snacks, and it is literally these sort of little things that we can do that sometimes may seem so simple. Just like I've got, daily gratitude, things like journaling that I had only restarted during the COVID pandemic. I used to write a diary when I was a teenager, and it had one of those little old-fashioned padlocks on. I say to my mum, whatever you do in my old room, you're not reading my diaries from when I was a teenager. But journaling for me was so powerful during, especially the pandemic, when there was so much going on. And I had just qualified as a personal trainer a year before the COVID pandemic. And I had just started training women just by chance, because people had found out, some friends had found out that I'd sat the courses. I was not planning to have clients as such. And, friends were asking. And so I just said, I've got a space in my basement in my home. I'll start training some of you. And because I was an ex project manager, I used to work in the corporate world in my 20s, which I gave up, to be mum for about just over a decade. I was very thorough, Scott. I was like literally pernickety writing them these personalized plans for like 30 to 70-year-olds. And they were all not just getting excellent like results physically. There were so many different goals, which made me really understand about women's health. Like, you talk about the whole looking in the mirror and that self-confidence and that self-esteem, and it can be so challenging. When I hit perimenopause, which I guess, I don't know if you've talked about on your podcast, but it's a topic again that we just never talked about, like up until just a few years ago. And I actually hit perimenopause at the same time as qualifying as this personal trainer, who then went on to social media just to help people keep moving during the pandemic twice a day. And I started getting all these, pretty wacky symptoms, from like brain fog to a little bit of anxiety, which I'd never ever experienced before. To obviously, when your menstrual cycle is all over the place, the hormones are out of whack. It can affect your self esteem, your mood, it affects everyone around you. And I just put it down to stress. I just thought, I'm doing new things. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm on Instagram and Zoom and YouTube and, all these platforms where I was not planning on being a public facing person. But I've always been very genuine. And I was saying, before some of my lives as well, I was saying to this community that suddenly started growing and joining us every day that, I was feeling really anxious before I got on here. But, after this just 10-minute exercise snack that we did out in the garden and had a bit of fun, I used to publicly just say, like, thank you guys, because I feel so much better now. And you've really helped me. And I didn't join the dots with perimenopause up until, only 2 years ago. And it was just from a documentary that was out in the UK on Channel 4. And they showed the changes in the brain. And when they showed, it's actually Dr. Mosconi, who's a US doctor who you may have heard of. And she showed the changes in the brain that happened to a female during this perimenopause time. And obviously she researches a lot about Alzheimer's. And the kids were fed up of saying to me, even my husband, Lavina, I've told you this. Like, how come you can't remember things, write things down? And it was a bit worrying when I was meeting people and you suddenly, like, you forget their name, or you've forgotten like short-term memories. And it broke me to tears, Scott. I literally was crying. And you talk about soccer, the boys would never switch off their football, as we call it in the UK. They were watching a Liverpool match, so it's their team. And there was me crying so loud that they actually switched it off downstairs, came up, rushed up, and they were like, what's happened? What's happened? And they just sat in bed with me, like holding my hand. I was sobbing away. And I said, look, I just want you to watch this with me. So we rewound, and they both, like they sat with me, which was pretty amazing. And it's like the penny dropped. I was like, I'm in perimenopause. So I went on social media the next morning in tears saying, I'm in perimenopause. And people were like, what does that mean? What is it? And I said, I've only discovered it. It could be 10 years for any woman, but not that all women will even have symptoms. It's like 1 in 4, I think, may have debilitating symptoms. 1 in 4 may have no symptoms at all. But it was just more that I realized, I've got to be in tune with my body, and there are things that are going on. It's justified. So I've obviously been sharing this for the last sort of 2 years, and now there's been this sort of menopausal revolution, I think, especially in the UK and the US. And you just think, gosh, where were we before this? Like, just as a man, for you, like for me to be able to share this on your platform, I want men to be part of this conversation, because whether it's your wife, whether it's your daughter, your mum, your colleague, your friends, you're all going to have women in your lives. And it's just like a conversation, just like puberty. Like, we just got to all understand that this is a phase that women will go through and hopefully thrive. I want to be very positive about it, because I have done loads during this period. Even though I've had the symptoms, the book is all about how we can navigate these symptoms through lifestyle changes and through exercise. And I truly believe, those are just like fundamental in terms of feeling good.
Yeah, well, excuse me, I am not uncomfortable with these topics because
Oh,
I
good.
grew up in a household where I'm the oldest grandson in an Italian Catholic family. I
Oh,
had
yeah.
5 aunts that were
Wow.
surrounding my life. My mom and all of her sisters were all teenagers growing up, and we'd be at the beach, and I was the only young boy. I listened to everything, and when I got to college, I was having conversations and teaching so many of my friends things that they had no idea about, mainly because they just hadn't been surrounded by it. And so
By women,
I'm
yeah.
very intrigued with the conversation of perimenopause, because having a spouse that is in her 40s, that's
Mhm.
extremely athletic, that's also busy, we as
Mm.
husbands and men in general, the more we know about it, the more receptive we can be, the more helpful we can be. And it's also challenging because if there's hormonal changes or mood changes or forgetfulness, these are things that are challenging with the people that you love the most.
Totally.
And your patience level is usually the least with the people that you
Yes,
love the most. So
exactly.
it's because it's very natural. You're going from a similar state where you're both the same for all these years, and then there's a
Mm.
differential that changes. And I can understand that that could be a major challenge, and how to be better at it. How are you advising the men? How have you and your husband went through go through this together? Like, what are some of the things that you've done that could help other men through that process, not just the women that are listening and becoming aware?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important conversation. So thank you for being so open to talk about it. I think like when I research the book, especially, and I look at the statistics around divorce rates and the amount of midlife women that are filing for divorce, so it affects relationships. If you think about, having teenage, potentially children in the house, and they've got these roller coaster of hormones going on in their lives, and then you have mum also going through them. And then you look at, mental health. I think it said that 9 out of 10 women in the study that I quoted in the book have mental health issues during the menopause. And that could be anything from like mood changes to severe depression. And I think a few years ago, a lot of women used to just go to the doctors and the first thing they were prescribed would be antidepressants, because obviously doctors were also not trained. It's not their fault, but this whole area of women's health has just never been covered enough. There's not been enough research, let alone enough representation in the research, because menopause can also change between ethnicity as well. So being South Asian, I'm very vocal about, I'm part of this Menopause Mandate group here in the UK, which is a campaigning group with a lot of big names, celebrities, famous faces that are all trying to share their message. And for me, it's having someone that looks like me for the South Asian community, and to know that as a South Asian woman, I can go through menopause 5 or 6 years earlier than the average white female. So here they say, the average age for a white female is 51, and that's when you've had no periods for a year. It's almost like a point in time, the menopause. And then you have the perimenopause, like I was explaining, it could be a decade before. But being a South Asian woman, I could be starting that maybe in my mid 30s, late 30s. So there's definitely differences to highlight. I think, this whole conversation, I go into workplaces as well to talk about the menopause, because you could have a male boss. And I can imagine it's pretty difficult, even for that male boss, to know what to say and how to act. So there's lots of different, training that's going on, especially in the UK here. And I always try and bring out the things that we can do, obviously, in terms of our own, what's in our hands, right? Like all these free tools. I've got 80 free tools in this book where it's about taking simple changes to your lifestyle. It can be the exercise, snacking. It could be going out in nature. I've done a lot of research about the power of nature. It could be breath work, which I think is so amazing. And that's the biggest tool, I've used before, like big podcasts, interviews, anything I'm doing where I may just be feeling that I'm in that fight or flight mode and I need to reset my nervous system and just calm the body and mind. Even a minute is all it can take sometimes to do some of those deep breathing practices, to obviously like self-care, to sleep, food, like it all comes together, I feel. But for men, my husband and I probably did our most vulnerable live ever, and it's one that I just can't watch back. And it's buried in there in my Instagram, but it was the one where he was reluctant at first to talk about the menopause. He was just thinking, well, I said to him, Menel, will you please come on with me? Because I think not only are men not in this conversation, South Asian men are just nowhere near this conversation because they've never really talked about it. And he was hesitant at first. And then when I kind of persuaded him and said, like, I think it's going to help people if we just talk openly about some of the challenges that we've had. But Scott, he completely then like warmed up to the camera and he gave so much away that I was like sitting there thinking, oh my God, like he was, quite very open about the fact that we went to like therapy, which I had never shared before. Like mental health is another one of those taboo subjects in my community where, especially men's mental health, I think that's a huge thing. But even for couples to say that there's something wrong and that they've gone to seek help, like I think everyone should have therapy. That's my outlook, but I know it's not talked about enough over here with South Asians. So when he came out and said, it was really challenging on our relationship and we worked at it, and I guess it's awareness. It's like having this education. I've told men to read my book because it will give them an insight on what is going on in a female's body. Like I've done it by sort of mood as well. Like there's a mood menu at the back that anyone could use, like from, I'll just show you the book. It's kind of like it's a very easy read. So when I say to men, please read it, they're like, I don't read books. And I say, no, this is literally big font. It's like a guide. It's not like a heavy read, but it's got a lot of basic terminology and science around what we can do. And then this mood menu at the back, I feel, is something that we can probably all relate to. So I've done like low mood, anxious and overwhelmed, unproductive, if you've been sitting too long, feeling bloated. And it just gives you a whole load of different snacks based on time. It can be as short as a minute to 10 minutes. But I think men, I guess what I would love them to do is just be there as, and try and like just pay an interest, right, into the female's perspective in their lives. Be there just sometimes just to listen. And I think when you realize that estrogen levels are dropping, hormones are changing, it could be affecting her sleep, it's affecting her mood. Like every day is quite different. And I'm very open now. The boys know all about when mum's having a peri day, as we call it. And it may be a little bit of light-hearted fun, but it sometimes just breaks the atmosphere. And they realize, okay, mum is like struggling a little bit today, or just give me a little bit of time. Yes, I have forgotten. I will write it down again. Um, it's like an education and a process for all of us, because like you say, we are going to take it out on our loved ones, unfortunately. But if we can all just pay an interest and understanding, which I think you're great because you've been surrounded by women all your lives. Did you remember any of your aunts like talking about menopause out of interest, or?
No, I mainly just remember the hot flashes and how
Yeah,
like just any level of the probably the most annoying thing for somebody like it for me when I'm riding in the car with my wife, she has to have air on her at all times and our whole car is freezing. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is
I
feeling in the
know.
car.
Yeah,
And I've talked about this a lot because my boys will be like, "You and mom bicker about the air conditioning." It's the
yeah.
second time I've talked about it today, but it's no joke. It's
Yeah,
so funny
I
because
know.
I'm so aware of everyone else in the car that
Yeah.
I'm an advocate, right? And so I'm like trying to make it the
Oh,
comfortable temperature. And then she's like, "If I want air, I want air." And so we're
yeah,
going through and that's I remember my mom doing that. I remember her
yeah,
mom doing that. I remember, and it was a lot easier to accept when it's your mother, your
yes,
mother-in-law,
yes.
when it's your
It's
wife and
hard.
you're all in the car. And especially, it's very hard for, I know it's hard for women that have only boys because there's
Mm,
also a lack of, see,
yeah,
like your husband when he opened up, the challenge that men have is we're either in or we're out.
yeah,
We don't go halfway. So if
yeah,
you want us
yeah,
to be in, we're going to go all in and we're going to
yeah.
say more than you wanted us to say.
Yeah,
And then you're going to
exactly.
be super uncomfortable with us.
Yeah.
And then we think we went too far. And so, and then the other side to
Can't
that is
win for you.
no,
I'm
we can't.
sorry.
No, it's not poor. And I don't mean it to be
No,
poor men. I just
no,
mean
I'm
that I
joking.
think our goal is to be a
Mm,
protector. And so the
yes,
other side that you mentioned is that it's helpful to just sit there and listen. We struggle with just sitting and listening. We are action
mm,
oriented. All men want to
yeah,
solve your problems.
yeah,
We are
you're right.
your protector, your provider. If
Yeah,
a good man should be doing these things for his wife. And so in our minds, we also know that there's many times in your life where you've listened to us and it's been very positive because
mm,
we've had to push you out of a comfort zone that you
mm,
wouldn't, just like you do us in lots of settings.
yeah,
But when it
yeah,
comes to something that becomes emotional and it's
yeah,
internal, there doesn't seem to be a win. And so it's challenging to communicate. If we say, "Hey, we've noticed that your mood is changing and it's substantial and we want to help, how do we help?" That's not always going to be received very well. And
yeah,
so I think it's a journey like marriage. And I love that
it
you
is.
mentioned therapy, coaching. I think sometimes just having other couples around to talk through some of your challenges.
I was just going to say
The
social connection is
Yeah,
huge. You know, like of all the things that I look at, obviously I'm, a big promoter advocate for movement and exercise, but it was social connection that the science is pointing at as the biggest thing for a happy, healthy life, for our longevity. And I'm all about, how we future proof our bodies, how we remain independent, healthy, happy, not just physically, but, you know, I'm sure, I did a live with Dan Butner, who you obviously know very well, in the US, about his blue zones. And it is that whole sense of community. And I saw that with even in the pandemic when I started doing the lives, and I do them then with my mother-in-law because I was feeling so sad about the elderly being left out. And South Asian elderly people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s they've probably never exercised or ever lifted weights or done, like squats and press ups and shoulder presses and things like that. But I got them all joining in and I couldn't believe the response. But it was more, I think, the community. And that's why I've carried it on every Friday, like they're all on my YouTube channel and we go live and we have this Zoom community that all turn up and we talk to them at the end. And it's that talking. There was like a 74-year-old lady on there that comes every week, and when she saw that I started talking about menopause, she opened up about her menopause. And then I saw this ripple effect, which I see with, when I'm just observing people. And another lady then talked about it, and then a husband talked about it and said, I've got daughters, and I'm going to probably, get them to just start following you, Lavina, or like just paying an interest. I just thought for an Indian man in his like late 70s to even pay that interest is such a big win. But yeah, social connection. Like I feel, when we did that live, so many of our friends, we were just like blown away. They were like, some of my husband's friends, closest friends, said, I think you've saved my marriage. Like he heard that from about three like guys saying, I actually had no idea that this is what's happening to my wife. And obviously it causes, so many arguments, so many situations where if you just don't even understand what's going on, it's inexplainable, right? So I think we're making progress, just knowing awareness around women's health and menopause is like the biggest thing. But I think it is still a journey, and, surround yourself with people that you can share it with, because I'm sure if you talk to one of your friends, they're probably going through the same thing. My husband can sympathize with you because I used to be the coldest person on the planet. And now our room is like an ice bucket at night. The windows are open. I'm like trying to throw off. I've got cooling blanket, pillow, and all this stuff. And actually, hot flushes are things that I've only just started experiencing. In fact, the studies here are showing that hot flushes are like the old wives' tale of that's what menopause is. But actually, things like anxiety and mood changes are coming up higher as more common symptoms. You get things like hair loss, like low libido, like joint pains. That's like there's so many barriers to sometimes even having that motivation to move and to exercise. So I'm trying to reframe how just even like a minute, if you just get out for like what I call a feel good walk in nature, that can help potentially banish some of the mood, increase your energy, like just start making you feel a bit less brain foggy, that cotton wool brain. Um, and there's science that's backing it, which is great, but it's getting these messages out there, right?
I think it's great. And when you're bald, you're always cold. So the other side is when that fan's blowing at all times, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm freezing.
Gonna have
So
to get you a winter hat
yeah,
from the
I have
UK.
slept with a beanie on my head because I like with one of those. I joke. I'm like I've turned into Ebenezer Scrooge. I'm wearing a nightcap like an old man because I can't handle the frigid temperatures
It's
of the room.
crazy. God,
Um,
I bet so many couples are going to relate to this. Please let us know if this is you as well. 'Cause it's like
y-
it's happening to all of us, right?
Well, and you also mentioned the libido side, and I think
Yeah.
that men are so results oriented. And if you read Gary
Mhm.
Chapman's The Five Love Languages, he says, you know, everybody has a predominant love language, but men all have the physiological need
Yeah.
for that connectivity.
Yeah.
And so when that changes and they already struggle with that conversation and rejection
Mhm.
and those things, that's where
Mm.
you start to see couples really, really
I know.
separate.
Drift.
And I think that having some of these conversations is really important because I feel like it's also a turning point into not only aging, but aging well. Meaning
Yeah.
that so many women and men that I know that just stopped doing stuff when they started to experience the next chapter of their life. For women,
Mm.
it might be menopause. For men, it just might be towards retirement and not having the same impact. But
Yeah.
they slow down and they stop moving, and everything changes. And then they become old, right? But if
Yeah.
those that keep moving, those that keep growing, that are keep
Yeah.
investing in each other, doing some
Mm.
things occasionally they don't want to do. Maybe the
Yeah.
temperature's too low or high. And these are all investing in each other to invest in that relationship. And it's extremely valuable.
Oh gosh, like I think never keep learning, never keep investing in yourself. Things like just learning, keeping our brain health. I always talk about keeping our brains fit, going back to the whole dementia and Alzheimer's. Science is showing us that the changes in your brain start in your midlife, in your 30s and 40s. And obviously, you see the symptoms much later on in life. But we need to be proactive, I guess, on all health fronts. It's the things that you can't see, right? It's more the hidden bits that I think it's just the rates here of things like cancers and everything is just getting so scary. But the fact that we can do, like these sort of exercise snacks, these sort of bite-sized amounts through the day, I think with modern lifestyles, especially, I don't know about in the US, but since the COVID pandemic, a lot of working options for people have changed. So a lot of people are working from home, which has such great advantages, but it also means, even you and I have gone past my 30-minute timer of where I need to get up and get moving because people are sitting on virtual meetings sometimes back to back. They're saying 9 to 10 hours a day. And I've written this section in this book, which may be relatable to people listening. And I think so many people can relate that you might get an hour's workout done in the morning and you're thinking, yay, I've done it. I've ticked the box. But then when I started researching the fact that people are sitting for the rest of the day, there's a study that shows that just 2 hours of sitting can negate 20 minutes of movement. And that's about like, our health and how detrimental sitting is. I used to call it sitting is the new smoking. But it's modern technology, right? We're either on virtual meetings or we're all on our phones, and then we're seeing the back pain and the rounding, the kyphosis of our spine. We should do my little desk reset snack now, which is like the analogy of a desk shape, up, back, and down, to just like simple movements. I always teach these in workplaces that if you can switch off your camera and if you could just get up and do some sit and stands or squats or some press ups against the table, some dips, or just some star jumps, something that's going to boost your mood and productivity. But it's pretty scary, I think, knowing how detrimental, like modern lifestyle is. But then just if you could just start breaking up the day and it becomes things that we can tie on to existing habits. So I don't know if you've seen on my social media, I always talk about brushing your teeth on one leg. And that was because of a study that shows that if you can balance on your leg for just 10 seconds, it increases your chances of a longer life. And I won't give you the morbid study that's in the book, but 10 seconds can actually, it just sounds so simple, but if you do it when you're brushing your teeth, it's become habit now for the last 8 months. And now I've built up to a minute. I can even try closing my eyes. There's lots of different progressions. As based on your age, you can aim for a different number. And balance is so important because we hear about, people later in life falling over and how detrimental that is to their own, like obviously independence, but also to their loved ones, and how you then become a burden, unfortunately, to your children or your partner. And hip fractures, especially in women, are so common. And then your chances of a premature death also are then affected. So balance is like it's one of those things where you might be thinking about, I don't want to fall over when I'm older. But even if you're a runner listening, we all have muscular imbalances. And give it a go. Like if you can start brushing your teeth on one leg to then maybe moving after each meal, that's so brilliant for our blood sugar levels. So I talk about type 2 and pre-diabetes. I have this thing called the stair snack, which was based on a study in the pandemic, which I found that 3 flights of stairs, 3 times a day, over a 6-week period, they did a study where it just improved people's cardiovascular health, their fitness, and their overall strength in their bodies so significantly. You just think, I might as well, in my coffee breaks or after my meals, just be ineffective with your laundry or your housework and just go, the kids see me sometimes just going up and down stairs because that's just a quick win. I could just take a call and keep moving, pacing around the house if I
Right.
can't get out in nature. But for me, it's breaking up the day, and it's not always exercise. It's sometimes like you talked about hot and cold therapy. That's something else that I researched and has become quite a big topic here in the UK as of, I just say, probably the last year. And I would never, ever have dreamt of going and having a cold shower. But it's been one of those tools that has just helped me so much. I feel so invigorated and energized and clearer cognitively and more productive. That are things that we can do if you don't have access to a cold plunge itself, or a lake. Just a quick cold shower, ending your shower on a little blast of cold, or the sauna, the heat therapy as well. But it's a lot of different lifestyle tools that I feel people can just pick and mix. So it's not like I'm saying do all of them, but based on your mood, how you're feeling, or what your lifestyle is like, because we're all just so different, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I came home from a busy day. Um, we had a big soccer game. It was a state semifinal game. My son was undefeated all year. They lost the first time, which puts them out of
Oh,
the state. So
yeah.
we drove home. We were completely dejected, all of us.
Mm,
And we decided we were going to go to a concert that night. And I bought last minute tickets, and I had no energy, zero
mm,
energy. I was I was done. I was emotionally drained. I was exhausted from travel earlier in the week. I hadn't caught up yet. And I just said, I need 2 minutes. I did 2 minutes in my cold plunge. I've splashed water all over my face. I was completely
different.
rejuvenated. I was like,
Yay.
it's a completely different, and
Miracle.
I would have been done any
Mm,
other day. I would have been done. And now we had a great time at the concert. We were up late. Our whole family
yay.
went. It was a super fun afternoon or evening that kind of
Mm,
changed the challenge in the day. But
yeah,
it's knowing what, it's also testing out what works for you.
totally.
Sometimes I wear this Whoop, and I track everything, so I am always tracking things. If I have a late meal, and sometimes you can't avoid a late meal, but a late meal to me is as detrimental as drinking alcohol or worse.
Yeah,
So
same.
when I have a late meal now, I really focus on moving after the meal. So
Yeah,
usually
good.
I will you're in a place like Las Vegas for a conference, and every meal ends at like 10 o'clock. There's nothing you could
Yeah,
do about it. So I go for the long walk, and I walk a
same.
mile or whatever, and I
Yeah,
sleep much better. So we're
same.
figuring these things out for ourselves, but it takes a little bit of trial and error, to your point.
Yeah.
What works for you is really what we need to be focused on.
Yeah, what works for you, find what you enjoy. I'm the same, literally after every meal, I will just do, if I can, based on the UK's weather, which is always an issue, but I will find a way to move, even if it's just like a 10-minute sort of yoga flow, some stretches in the evening. I know that's going to help me wind down, but generally like a 10-minute walk. But even if they say, like, I think the old Indian tradition was to walk like just 100 steps, and that's where it kind of originated from. But I've worn a blood sugar monitor, and I've seen the impact it has. And when your blood sugars are, so on that roller coaster, and it does affect your mood and your sleep and even what you want to eat, right? Like when you crash and then you want to binge and you want to just grab something sugary, when you can try and keep things a little bit more stable, and it's just staying in tune with your body. Like I think even without the fancy gadgets, which aren't accessible to everyone, it's,
Right.
I always say, just listen to your body, do what feels good for you. But it sounds like we're on the same page about so many of these little tricks and little lifestyle tools that I feel are just it's encouraging to know that they are backed by science, and it's encouraging to know that we can all have access to, everything I've put in the book is for free, to the point where you'll see in the workouts I do, like on a Friday morning, I use baked bean tins and plastic bottles and rucksacks as weights, because I don't want people to think you even have to have expensive gym membership or fancy equipment in the home or wherever you are. I can get people moving, like in conferences. I've been to the Houses of Parliament, to Downing Street in the UK, and I've got groups of people moving in the most unexpected places. But I want it to be a normal thing that you see people at the coffee machine doing their press ups against the counter, or
Yeah.
just like it should be. Hopefully I've got these wacky ideas, but I want it to be normalized, because we're all going to feel better, and everyone around you is going to, it's that ripple effect again. Will hopefully just think, oh, that looks pretty cool, I'm going to join in.
Well, I think the key is the older we get, the less we care what other people think we look
Totally.
like. And
Yeah.
so one of the benefits is that, I know I work out in my garage every morning and I have my TRX ropes and I do stretches when I
Yeah.
start. And I know that I look goofy when I start doing some of the balancing exercises, but I want to be able to move
Yeah.
into late adulthood. And I
Yes.
know that I'm now more flexible today than I've ever been in my entire life, because I've never been able to touch my toes. I've never been able to be
Yeah.
flexible.
Yeah.
And if I stay that way, it's going to be worse for me and how I show up to the world. How the
Yeah.
energy level that how I show up with that energy level, what
Yeah.
I'm doing is
Yeah.
so much worse if I'm not focused on it. So I love finding ways, and I'm in hotel rooms a lot, so I'm constantly doing dips on the
Yeah.
back of the
Yes.
bench or the bed or the
Yes.
chairs, or you
Yeah.
just do whatever you can do when you can do it.
Mobility, you sound like my husband. He's turned to golf because of, years of injuries playing football over here, and lots of different sports that golf seems to be, and into strength training. He started his strength training journey, also being double his size. He started a little bit after me, and obviously I think as a man he got quicker results, and he's maintained it
Yeah.
even more than me, because I just love my food so much. My mom is a chef, so I can just not, I don't believe in restriction. I believe in balance, enjoying life as well through food, but obviously feeding myself and nourishing my body. But yeah, I got him doing this mobility drill that we filmed on my YouTube channel, and he was reluctant. But I said, we're going to do this every day. And literally, it's been since January. So it's coming up to 6 months. And he has just said within about 2 months, he was telling all of his friends, he was like, I feel stronger. I'm lifting heavier weights. I can actually touch my toes, like you said. My golf has improved. For him, that's like his world at the moment. His golf has got so much better. His mood is better. And he's continued to the point where he's saying, like, if I don't do it now every day, like you, it just gives him that positivity. I think it helps with everything, with his work, his mindset, his energy. So it's simple things that when you find these tools, and when you feel, like they're actually doing the things that maybe you never imagined, like in terms of mood, energy, sleep, all the things like we may start struggling with as we age. And it is this whole future proofing, how do we stay independent as we age? How do we get out of bed ourselves? How do we try not to be, a burden on our loved ones? I think we just need to try and keep moving and doing what we can, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love the message. I'm excited about the Feel Good Fix book, tell our listeners how to find you, how to find your book. We're in the US. Is there anything different they need to do to find your stuff as far as are you on Amazon, or where can they get your book so that they can start learning and reading, men and women?
Yes. So at the moment, I believe it is in Amazon. You'll have to tell me, Scott, because I haven't
Okay.
asked anyone yet, but I think you're able to get it on Amazon. Obviously, if you've got friends in the UK, it's very accessible here. It's in all bookshops and online retailers. And everything I do is out there on social media. It's all under Feel Good with Lavina. So I'm very active on Instagram. You'll see I share, everything I'm doing basically. But I also have my YouTube channel, like I said, has got lots of workouts for all ages. My goal is for people even in care homes, children with disabilities, they're all using these physio approved chair based exercises to workplaces, like when you're on screen and you want to just do something even seated. But yeah, if you can get your hands on the book, that's brilliant, because it's got QR codes straight to videos as well of the exercises, which was quite exciting to do, to change publishing and just make it a little bit more interactive. But you can find me everywhere on all platforms at Feel Good with Lavina.
So I highly suggest you follow her, learn from
Oh,
her, and thank you so much for being a part of our show today. It's been a blessing and an honor to have you on the show.
oh, thank you so much. I think, when you were telling me about life and, when I checked out your work around love, impact, faith, and energy, it resonates with me so much. And I hope just having this conversation, even if there's women that may have left their old roles and maybe became mums like me and gave things up, I feel like midlife can be such a positive turning point. I want women and men to thrive through this period. So hopefully it will give you some positivity as well. Just hopefully listening to my very surreal story.
It's been great.
Oh, thank you for having me, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.